Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take those massive stacks of sources, the histories, the quarterly reports, the deep dive research, and we try to distill it all down.
Yeah, we boil it down into the essential knowledge that helps you, the listener, connect all the dots.
And today we are undertaking a really fascinating piece of, I guess you could call it corporate archaeology.
I like that. We're digging into a name that, for most people, is just completely synonymous with Americana. You know, rustic charm, summer kitchens,
The mason jar.
the iconic mason jar brand, Ball.
And if that's all you know about Ball, then you are in for a serious, serious shock today.
Oh, absolutely.
Our mission for this deep dive is to track the epic, 145-year journey of the company that bore that famous name. And it's a story that is just defined by its willingness to abandon success, to completely reinvent itself.
It really is. I mean, think about this trajectory. This company first mastered high-volume glass production. Okay, makes sense.
Right.
Then they executed this just radical pivot to pioneer aerospace technology for NASA.
Which is just mind-boggling.
And now, maybe most surprisingly of all, they are the world's largest manufacturer of recyclable aluminum packaging. It's the ultimate study in corporate survival through, like, a strategic identity crisis.
It's like watching a century-old tree suddenly decide to launch itself into orbit, only to later land and become, I don't know, a global infrastructure utility for the beverage industry. It's wild.
And the key, what we really want to unpack, is the mechanism of each pivot. What crisis forced them out of glass? How in the world did they get the know-how to build satellites?
Yeah, and why just recently did they sell that hugely successful $5.6 billion aerospace division?
Exactly. When you hear Ball, you think of glass. But the reality today is just, it's staggering.
It is. The Ball Corporation today is an $11.8 billion powerhouse. It's listed on the New York Stock Exchange, ticker is BALE now, and they're headquartered out in Westminster, Colorado.
And yes, to your point, they just sold their entire high-margin, super prestigious aerospace division for $5.6 billion
In cash.
in cash. They just decided to simplify their identity and focus completely on metal packaging. It's almost half the company's valuation in one single move.
So what we're going to unpack today is how five enterprising brothers, the Ball brothers, starting out in Buffalo, New York, managed to achieve these three massive successful leaps from glass to space and then to aluminum to reach their current, almost unimaginable global scale.
It's a testament to industrial adaptation, right?
Yeah.
Surviving antitrust restrictions and just always prioritizing where the resources and the market growth are going to be next.
I can't wait. Let's unpack this. Okay, so let's start where all great corporate stories seem to begin, with a bit of necessity and a tiny bit of borrowed money.
We're in Buffalo, New York. The year is 1880. And you have our main characters, the five Ball brothers, Frank, Edmund, William, Lucius, and George.
Right, and they were not, born into some industrial dynasty. They started a company called the Wooden Jacket Can Company.
And the seed money for this, get this, it was about $200.
$200?
Yeah, which they borrowed from their uncle, George Harvey Ball, who, as an aside, was actually the founder of Keuka College. It was a total shoestring operation.
And the original product description is so important because it tells you right away that they were not thinking about grandma's jams or pickles.
Not at all.
They were making industrial containers. Specifically, tin cans that were then encased in these wooden jackets. The market was heavy industry.
Right, they were holding things like kerosene, paints, varnishes, stuff you did not want to spill.
Yeah.
The visual of this thing is, well, it's kind of clunky. It's a metal can for liquids, and then you'd slide it into this bulky, protective wooden shell.
But what's really fascinating here, and what really dictated that first major pivot for the company, is what they were actually transporting. Kerosene.
Exactly, kerosene. Because the process of refining kerosene back then often involved treating it with acid. And the sources point to this crucial technical failure.
The acid was eating through the cans.
Precisely. It was causing corrosion in the tin cans that they were manufacturing. The cans were failing structurally because of the acidic liquids they were designed to hold.
So their immediate solution wasn't, to invent a new kind of tin alloy.
No, it was much more practical. They just needed to find a material that was chemically resistant, and so they were forced to start integrating glass inserts into the wood-jacketed cans. It was the only way to hold the corrosive liquid safely.
So glass was never the passion project. It was just a functional solution to a corrosion problem. That's incredible.
Yeah, and they were initially just buying these glass containers from an existing factory in Poughkeepsie, New York. But that necessity, it planted the seed. The idea that, well, if we have to use glass anyway, maybe we should just make it ourselves.
And that opportunity to, vertically integrate, it presented itself pretty quickly, and it was all thanks to intellectual property law.
Right. So around 1884, the brothers get wind of the fact that the patent for the key home canning product of the era, the Mason Improved Fruit Jar, was about to expire.
The name everyone knew.
The name everyone knew. And once that patent became public domain, the market was just wide open for anyone who could come in and mass produce them efficiently.
That's a perfect lesson, isn't it? Ball wasn't the inventor of the canning jar. They were the masters of manufacturing and distribution that came after the invention.
Exactly. So they jumped in full force into the home canning business. They started producing jars in all the familiar sizes, half-gallon, pint, and the smaller ones they called midget size.
And the glass back then wasn't the crystal clear stuff we see today, was it?
No, not at all. They often used lower-grade raw materials, which resulted in glass that was either amber-colored or that really distinctive aqua blue-green color.
Ball blue.
The famous ball blue. It's become iconic, but you have to remember, initially it was just the unavoidable result of the materials they had on hand. And of course, they stamped it proudly with their logo.
So on February 13th, 1886, they formalized this rapidly growing business. It's now the Ball Brothers Manufacturing Company. And almost immediately, they get hit with a massive external shock.
A disaster, really. Their Buffalo factory was completely destroyed by a fire in 1886. Everything they had built, gone.
Now, most companies would struggle just to rebuild in the same spot. But this disaster, it coincided perfectly with a major industrial discovery that was changing the economics of manufacturing, like overnight.
The discovery of just massive reserves of natural gas in the Midwest.
And this is where we have to introduce that critical thread that runs through their whole history: energy reliance. Glass making needs immense, consistent heat. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of degrees to melt silica.
And using natural gas was just vastly cheaper and way more efficient than using coal, which was the dominant fuel source back in Buffalo.
So the brothers realized if we stay in Buffalo, we're looking at high operating costs for the rest of our existence. But if we move west...
Instant competitive advantage. The sources say that Frank Ball was traveling and heard about this natural gas boom that was hitting Ohio and Indiana, and he just realized that Muncie, Indiana was the place to be.
And Muncie at the time was desperate for industry. The town leaders there were looking to capitalize on their new, cheap energy resource, and they offered the Ball brothers a deal that was, it was simply too good to refuse.
Oh, it was a phenomenal contract. Frank Ball signed a deal for 7 acres of land to build a factory, a gas well provided for their exclusive use.
They gave them their own gas well.
Their own gas well, plus $5,000 in cash, which was a huge sum for a startup that had just literally burned to the ground, and crucially, a railroad connection. They were essentially being paid and subsidized to move their entire operation.
That relocation commitment was just massive. Construction on the Muncie factory started in September 1887, and the brothers started making plans to move the entire glass manufacturing operation from New York.
It wasn't an instant move, though. Frank and Edmund, they made the initial leap. William and George stayed behind in New York for a little bit to keep operating the metal stamping works. They still had to make those zinc lids.
Right, keep the cash flow going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But by 1889, the company headquarters and all the glass and metal manufacturing had moved to Muncie. And the remaining brothers joined them in the 1890s, cementing Muncie as the home of the Ball Empire for decades.
It's a subtle but really interesting historical note, though, that the first products made in that Muncie factory in March of 1888, they weren't fruit jars.
No, they were still focused on those industrial needs, things like oil containers and lamp chimneys. But that cheap gas, it just allowed them to scale up the fruit jar business dramatically.
And the growth was, phenomenal, even when you factor in all the national economic turbulence of the time.
Yeah, despite having more factory fires in Muncie in 1891 and 1898, and the huge national economic panic of 1893, their production just surged. They went from making 22 million fruit jars in 1894 to a staggering 37 million jars by 1897.
So here's where they leveraged technology to really establish true market dominance. In 1898, they patented the FC Ball machine, and this wasn't just like a minor upgrade. This was a machine that introduced mass production through semi-automatic glass blowing.
Which was a game changer. Before this, glass production relied so heavily on skilled manual glass blowers. It was slow, it was expensive, it was inconsistent.
The craft.
It was a craft. This semi-automatic machine, which was developed by Frank and his associates, it just slashed their labor costs and dramatically increased the consistency of their output. This innovation gave them a monumental competitive edge over basically every other glass manufacturer in the country.
So by 1905, just 7 years after that patent, they're producing 60 million canning jars a year.
60 million. And they'd already acquired 7 other glass factories. Their initial strategy chasing that cheap energy had enabled them to invest in and then perfect this mass manufacturing technology.
But that initial crucial advantage, that natural gas boom,
Yeah.
it couldn't last forever.
No, the supply in Indiana was famously short-lived. It had been exploited so rapidly by so many industries that it started to dry up.
So when the gas supplies in the area began to diminish, the Ball brothers had to adapt again.
And they did. They quickly installed gas converters, which allowed them to use Indiana coal instead, ensuring that their manufacturing operations, their competitive advantage, continued without disruption.
So the key takeaway from this whole opening chapter is that Ball Corporation was really built on a series of these rapid industrial adaptations.
Absolutely. The initial product was forced by kerosene corrosion. The primary market was seized because a patent expired. And their competitive advantage was achieved by chasing cheap, localized energy and then mastering proprietary manufacturing tech.
It's a playbook for success, really.
Yeah.
So as we move into the early 20th century, the Ball Company, they're not just interested in making jars anymore. They're interested in dominating the entire ecosystem of home preservation.
Yes. They began to consolidate their position through what we now call vertical integration.
By 1922, they formally changed their name to the Ball Brothers Company, and they recognized that their core product, the canning jar, isn't just a piece of glass.
Right. It's glass, it's zinc for the metal lids, it's rubber for the sealing rings, and it's paper for the packaging. And they wanted to control that entire supply chain.
So they just started buying their own suppliers one by one.
Pretty much. They acquired a zinc strip rolling mill so they could produce the sheet metal for the lids themselves. They started manufacturing their own rubber sealing rings. They even bought a paper mill for their packaging materials.
Which gives them just tremendous control over cost, quality, and, crucially, the speed of their output.
And this integration, it extended far beyond just the jars. Later on, they expanded this strategy by acquiring companies that specialized in tin, steel, and even plastic packaging components. They were slowly transforming into a comprehensive packaging solutions provider, even if the glass jar was still their public face.
And their consumer presence was really cemented through education, which I find fascinating. In 1909, they published The Correct Method for Preserving Fruit,
which was the direct predecessor to the famous Ball Blue Book of home canning recipes.
It shows such a sophisticated understanding of branding, doesn't it? They weren't just selling you a product. They were selling the entire lifestyle and the knowledge base you needed to actually use that product effectively.
But this kind of rapid industrial scaling and consolidation, it brought with it some inherent challenges, particularly when it came to labor.
Right, which leads us to a really crucial historical moment that's often minimized in, the official corporate histories, the labor disputes at the Muncie facility.
We're talking about the 1910 strike. In March of that year, workers who were organized with local 200 of the industrial workers of the world.
The IWW, the Wobblies.
Exactly, the Wobblies.
Yeah.
They went on strike demanding wage increases.
And a quick settlement was actually reached, wasn't it, on March 29th?
It was. But then management very quickly reneged on the agreement and threatened a lockout. So the strike continued. But this is where the deeper industrial tension of the era really comes into play.
Because the strike effort was severely hampered by the machinists, the skilled workers.
Right. The machinists were affiliated with the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, and they refused to join the IWW strike.
And that matters so much because the IWW and the AFL represented two, radically different philosophies of unionism.
Totally different. The IWW championed what they called industrial unionism, which meant everyone in the factory, skilled or unskilled, should strike together as one unit. The AFL, on the other hand, focused on craft unionism, which was all about protecting the skilled trades.
So with that division, the company could exploit it.
Exactly. Because those skilled machinists refused to join the general industrial strike, the Ball factory could continue to function, even if it was slowly. This division ultimately fractured the entire effort, and the strike failed by the end of April.
It really underscores the immense power the company wielded as a major industrial employer in Indiana. They were able to exploit those divisions within the labor movement.
Despite those internal challenges, though, their dominance in the home canning market was just undeniable. Pre-1933, Ball was the largest domestic manufacturer, and by 1939, Get this, they manufactured an incredible 54% of all canning jars made in the U.S.
54%. I mean, that's a market monopoly in all but name.
But that level of saturation means you are incredibly vulnerable when the market shifts. And the Great Depression caused a huge, sustained drop in consumer demand for home canning jars.
Families just couldn't afford to stock up on the volume of produce they used to preserve.
So they pivoted again. They used their established glass lines to start manufacturing other commercial jars and bottles. Anything they could do to keep the factories running.
And then World War II forced an even more complete, though temporary, conversion.
Right. They converted a substantial part of their operations to produce shells and machine parts for the military effort, leveraging all that expertise they had in metal stamping and fabrication.
This ability to pivot proved their manufacturing strength. But the true crisis, the one that really defined their future, it came after the war, and it involved the U.S. government.
Two major hurdles. One was legal, one was commercial, and together they forced the company to completely abandon its legacy.
Okay, let's start with the legal roadblock, because this is something we need to dive into deeper. The 1947 U.S. Supreme Court antitrust case.
Right. So Ball was one of several defendants in this major federal case. The allegation, which dated back years, centered on anti-competitive practices, things like market control and potential price fixing within the very consolidated glass jar industry.
And the final decision, while it didn't dismantle the company, it was a devastating restriction on their future growth strategy.
It was. How exactly did it restrict them? That wasn't just a fine or something, was it?
No, it was structural. The decision specifically mandated that Ball was now required to seek and receive prior court approval before they could acquire any other glass manufacturer or any company involved in making related machinery.
Wow. Okay, just think about that for a moment. This immediately choked off their primary strategy for growth and consolidation, which was buying up competitors or key component suppliers within their core industry.
So the court effectively told them, you cannot expand any further in the glass industry without our explicit permission.
Their entire established playbook of vertical and horizontal integration in glass was just shut down by the highest court in the land. And at the same time, the consumer market for canning jars was in terminal decline.
Right. The post-war economy was affluent. People were moving toward frozen and commercially prepackaged food. The need for home preservation was just shrinking.
The combination was absolutely lethal. Legal restrictions prevented them from expanding horizontally in glass, and consumer trends were shrinking their core market.
And the ultimate critical data point that proves this. In 1949, Ball suffered its first net operating loss in company history.
That net loss is the true inflection point. It signaled the end of their historical identity as primarily a glass jar maker. The executives looked at the restrictions, they looked at the shrinking market, and they realized that survival meant diversification, not just adaptation within their existing framework.
It's a perfect illustration of how external crisis can force corporate genius, isn't it? When the door to growth in their current field was violently slammed shut by the Supreme Court, they were forced to seek entirely new horizons.
The horizon they chose was, well, it was literally out of this world.
Okay, we really have to address the biggest, most unbelievable leap in this entire history. They are legally restricted, they're suffering a net loss, and they're locked out of the glass market. How do you pivot from manufacturing home canning jars and military shells in Muncie, Indiana, to building hardware for NASA?
It's a radical transition.
Where do you even find the engineering talent for that?
This transition is so radical that it really highlights their commitment to survival and their willingness to spend a ton of capital just to acquire expertise they didn't have. Throughout the 1950s, the company was exploring these high-growth sectors, and the nascent aerospace industry was, it was a massive government-funded opportunity.
And they had to have known they couldn't just hire a few engineers in Indiana and call themselves a space company. They needed critical mass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they solved that talent problem by strategically locating their new venture. They formed the Ball Brothers Research Corporation, and they established labs in Boulder, Colorado.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
Right. Boulder was already emerging as this significant center for defense, atmospheric, and space research. It was right next to institutions like the University of Colorado. So they hired engineers and physicists, many of them likely recruited directly from research institutions like Caltech and MIT.
So they brought in completely new, high-tech blood and just radically shifted the company's internal culture.
That geographic move was absolutely crucial. They were intentionally separating the future of the company in Boulder from the restrictive legacy of Muncie. They officially began manufacturing aerospace equipment around 1959.
And their investment paid off, rapidly and spectacularly, which is why this gamble is so famous.
The timeline is just so tight. Just 3 years after they started manufacturing on March 7, 1962, Ball launched its OSO-1, the orbiting solar observatory satellite, which was designed and built specifically for NASA.
This wasn't a screw or a widget. This was a complete, successful scientific satellite delivered for the U.S. space program.
In 3 years.
That level of technical achievement instantly validated their whole radical diversification strategy. They went from making containers for preserved food to making containers for scientific instruments in outer space.
And that success, it just cemented their new identity. OSO-1 led directly to massive follow-on contracts for 7 total satellites in the OSO program. Ball was now a bona fide, reliable contractor in the high-stakes U.S. space race.
But those high stakes also meant high risk, and we can't just gloss over the immense danger that's involved in this type of work.
No, we absolutely have to acknowledge the tragic costs of innovation here. In 1964, during development, there was an explosion at the facility that tragically killed 3 workers and damaged the OSO-2 satellite.
Which really underscores that while the aerospace division brought prestige and high margins, it was inherently volatile and dangerous work. It's a world away from the relatively benign processes of bottling jam.
Absolutely. Despite that tragedy, though, the company continued expanding its research and manufacturing capabilities into avionics and aerospace systems. The identity shift was complete. They weren't the glass company anymore. They were the satellite company, providing stable, high-margin government contract revenue.
And back in Indiana, the original foundation was just being dismantled. The Muncie glass plant, the heart of the Ball empire for so long, it closed in 1962.
Yeah, glass production continued at some other facilities for a while, but that chapter was functionally closed.
So by 1969, the corporate identity was solidified around its new ventures. The company was formally renamed simply Ball Corporation.
And in that same pivotal year, 1969, the year of the moon landing, of all years, they made the second strategic acquisition that really defines their current existence.
Right. They acquired Jeffco Manufacturing Company, a maker of recyclable aluminum beverage cans.
Wait a minute, why aluminum cans? They just successfully established themselves in aerospace, which is high margin and stable. Aluminum cans are high volume, super competitive, and relatively low margin. Why would you enter that market?
That's the key question. They understood market dynamics, and they leveraged their core expertise. Ball had decades of experience in high-volume, precision metal fabrication from making all those tin cans, the zinc lids, the military shells.
So the rapidly emerging aluminum beverage can market, which was being driven by consumer convenience and this new recyclability movement, it was a perfect fit for their skills.
Right. It utilized their existing metal skills on a massive commercial scale that was completely non-restricted and non-regulated by that antitrust ruling.
And their entry strategy was not timid at all. The Jeffco acquisition immediately made Ball the largest producer of recyclable beverage cans in the world.
Wow. So they entered the market right at the top. They just bypassed years of incremental growth using all that massive capital flow they had built up from the aerospace contracts.
So now they were diversified across 2 radically different sectors: stable, high-margin aerospace contracts on one hand, and a volatile, high-volume global packaging on the other.
And with this new industrial architecture in place, the family-run business was finally ready to join the global public markets.
Yep. The company stock went public on July 13th, 1972, and it began trading on the New York Stock Exchange in 1973.
The fact that they survived that 1947 antitrust case and the net loss of 1949 by completely transitioning into 2 separate, high-growth, unrelated industries, it's not just a crucial piece of corporate history. It's a masterclass in risk management and adaptation.
But to fully move forward, the final piece of the legacy, the source of their fame, it needed to be completely separated.
So if the Ball Corporation is now this multi-billion-dollar aluminum and aerospace firm, what is the connection to the jars that you still see on the shelf at the hardware store? This has to be a key point of confusion for almost every consumer.
It is, and it requires a really clear distinction between the current corporation and its branded legacy. The Ball Corporation stopped producing its own glass jars entirely. Their final glass manufacturing operations were sold off in 1996.
Okay, but they kept the brand, right? The iconic jar, the blue-green glass, the logo that was still theirs.
Technically, yes, but only for a short period. The home canning business, which included that famous trademark, was first spun off into a subsidiary called Ultrista in 1993.
Okay.
And then they sold off Ultrista in 1996 as a completely freestanding corporation.
And then the subsequent corporate trail just gets dizzying.
It really does. Ultrista later renamed itself Jarden Corporation in 2001. Jarden then merged with Newell Rubbermaid to become Newell Brands in 2016.
So here is the critical distinction for you, the listener. Newell Brands now licenses the famous Ball-registered trademark for its home canning products.
So the iconic mason jar brand that evokes all that nostalgia is, today, just a licensing deal.
And the corporation that shares the name, the $11.8 billion giant, is busy making soda cans and, until recently, satellites. That distinction is fundamental to understanding the modern company.
Absolutely. The modern Ball Corporation had shed its glass past and was focused entirely on global expansion in packaging and managing its aerospace contracts. And as its focus became more global, its roots in Muncie, Indiana felt increasingly anachronistic.
Which prompted another headquarters relocation. In 1998, the corporate headquarters moved from Muncie to Broomfield, Colorado.
A move that really solidified its focus on overseeing massive global operations as a manufacturer of metal containers and a supplier to the aerospace industry. It permanently distanced itself from its agricultural manufacturing roots.
From this point forward, the growth story is one of just relentless consolidation through acquisition, all aimed at cornering the global aluminum packaging market.
Let's track some of these massive acquisitions.
Yeah, let's do it.
In 1997, they acquire MC Packaging Ltd. in China. This was a massive strategic move. It instantly positioned them as the largest supplier of cans in the rapidly expanding Chinese market.
A critical foothold in Asia.
Huge. Then came the move to dominate Europe. In 2002, they acquired Schmalbach-Lübecker AG, a German-based metal can company. And this wasn't just integration, this was scale. It created Ball Packaging Europe and immediately boosted Ball's beverage can sales by over $1 billion a year.
$1 billion,
Yeah.
just from that one acquisition.
Annually. And they weren't just buying beverage can companies either. They started diversifying the types of aluminum packaging they made. So in 2006, they entered the steel aerosol business with the acquisition of U.S. Can.
And by 2010, they were focusing on the component supply chain itself.
Right, which brings us to a crucial technical term that we should probably clarify for everyone listening. In 2010, through acquisitions like Newman Aluminum and American SAS, they became the largest supplier of aluminum slugs globally.
Okay, what exactly is an aluminum slug?
Think of it this way. The standard beverage can is made from a rolled-up sheet of aluminum metal. An aluminum slug is a small, solid, preformed, dense piece of aluminum, usually a cylinder. And these slugs are used to create extruder products like aluminum aerosol cans, specialty bottles, or high-pressure cylinders. It's a very niche, high-precision segment of the packaging market, and Ball decided they wanted to dominate the raw material supply for it.
And their ultimate consolidation move came in 2016 when Ball acquired the British firm Rexam Pellicky for $6.1 billion.
That acquisition was the definitive market event. It solidified their status, without a shadow of a doubt, as the world's largest producer of aluminum beverage cans. They had successfully cornered the global market. They achieved the scale and efficiency necessary to compete in that high-volume, low-margin environment.
And in more recent years, we've seen them leveraging that expertise and their focus on sustainability. That brings us to the lightweight Ball aluminum cup, which they introduced in 2019.
Yeah, and that's an explicit branding push toward recyclability as an alternative to single-use plastics in high-volume venues, like stadiums and concert halls.
And they linked this innovation directly to their public image. In 2020, Ball acquired the naming rights to the Pepsi Center in Denver, renaming it Ball Arena.
Which placed their brand right in the center of major sports and entertainment. It was a signal of a forward-facing, modern, and very high-visibility corporate presence.
So at this point, they're dominating aluminum packaging globally, while their aerospace division just continues to run successfully in the background. But success in two completely unrelated fields can lead to corporate complexity and, I guess, divided capital.
Which brings us to the biggest news story of their last few years, the massive strategic shift in 2024. Despite its prestige, its revenue, its high-margin government contracts, Ball divested Ball Aerospace entirely. They sold it to BAE Systems, Inc. for a staggering $5.6 billion in cash.
Okay, but why? Why sell off a division that is stable, high-margin, and highly specialized? Why choose to be only a can company, which is far more competitive, requires massive infrastructure investment, and has lower margins?
That's the core analytical challenge of this whole deep dive, isn't it?
Mhm.
The rationale, at least as stated by the CEO, Dan Fisher, was purely strategic. He said the move allows Ball to increase its focus on low-carbon, best-value aluminum packaging initiatives.
So they use that massive capital infusion to simplify the business and refocus entirely on their core strength, which they see as the future of sustainable packaging.
It's a calculated risk. Aerospace is stable, but it requires constant high-level R&D and a lot of political maneuvering. Packaging is competitive, but it aligns perfectly with this massive global demand for sustainable circular economy products.
And that $5.6 billion allows them to pour capital into optimizing their can production network and expanding globally without all the complexity of managing defense contracts.
And that focus shift is continuing into 2025. They even sold a majority stake in their Ball aluminum cup business, forming a joint venture named Oasis Venture Holdings, specifically to accelerate the growth of that category under new ownership.
While at the same time acquiring Alukin and Florida Can Manufacturing to further optimize their core aluminum packaging network. Every single move now is calculated to simplify and dominate aluminum.
The story of Ball Corporation is just a history of these successive, brutal exits. They exit wood and tin for glass because of corrosion. They exit glass for aerospace and aluminum because of antitrust limitations and drop in demand. And finally, they exit aerospace to focus 100% on dominating aluminum packaging and leveraging the global environmental imperative.
It's just an incredible story of constant change. Hashtag tag outro.
As we conclude this deep dive, it feels like we're returning to the theme that justified that final massive divestment: sustainability.
Right. The current Ball Corporation is intensely focused on the environmental legacy that aluminum packaging offers, mainly because of its infinite recyclability.
And this focus wasn't just, recent window dressing. Their formal commitment to sustainability actually began way back in 2006, and they issued their first report in 2008, but they were pretty early to that game.
They were recognized for it quickly, too, which shows they were serious about the transformation.
And that transformation has been validated repeatedly by external benchmarks. They've successfully transitioned their public identity from a historical glass manufacturer to a global leader in green manufacturing.
What kind of recognition are we talking about?
Well, recent stuff includes being named to Time's World's Most Sustainable Companies list in 2024, and they've had consistent inclusion in S&P Global's Sustainability Yearbook in both 2023 and 2024. They have successfully linked their core product, the aluminum can, directly to the circular economy.
So let's look at the final tally on this. The Ball journey starts with 5 brothers borrowing $200 in Buffalo to solve a kerosene corrosion problem.
An amazing start.
And that initial spark evolved through industrial fire and the constant pursuit of cheap energy into the iconic glass jar brand, then the sophisticated satellite powerhouse of the 1960s.
And now, a public global aluminum powerhouse with $11.8 billion in 2024 revenue. It is a stunning example of corporate agility.
I think they realized that efficiency, capital allocation, and market dominance required them to maintain a willingness to just discard successful but restrictive past identities.
First glass, then aerospace, all to secure a more unified and profitable future in packaging.
And every single one of those pivots, from the 1880s all the way to today, it came down to a calculation involving resources and energy. The initial pivot to Muncie hinged entirely on the realization that natural gas was cheaper than coal for making glass. That's what allowed them to scale.
And that is a perfect point to end on, because it ties that 19th century energy boom directly to the 21st century challenge.
Yeah.
The success of the Ball brothers hinged on that short-lived, localized natural gas boom in Indiana.
So where's the connection to today?
Today, the aluminum packaging industry is critically dependent on massive, consistent, and cheap energy, particularly hydroelectric power, which is essential for the aluminum smelting process.
So let's leave our listeners with this final provocative thought. How dependent are modern megacorporations, even the ones focused on recyclable materials like aluminum, on specific, often localized energy resources?
Right. If a massive, unforeseen energy or geopolitical pivot were to happen, say a sudden shift in global hydropower availability or massive carbon taxation that disrupts energy grids, what corporate identity might Ball Corporation be forced to discard next?
What would they have to invent in favor of a fourth, completely unforeseen industrial strategy?
The jars and the jets are gone, but the lesson of constant reinvention remains. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the continuous evolution of the Ball Corporation.
We'll catch you next time.